telecom and last mile access, and why on earth does Microsoft care about this TV white space thing and this whole area of dynamic spectrum access and sharing? If you think about Microsoft, we're sort of in the midst of this transition from, in reality we actually already made the transition, but a transition from a company that sells software in boxes to a company who's actually a service provider and is delivering cloud services from West Virginia or other places. So we've become ever more reliant on connectivity to be able to access customers of different kinds and access different markets. Microsoft was a company early on that was sort of founded on this idea of democratizing access to technology. Bill Gates had this crazy idea that everybody in the world was going to have a desktop computer. And that idea, that sort of basic idea of democratizing access to technology really hasn't changed. And so if you look at our current leader, Satya Nadella, who just became the CEO of the company a year and a half ago, for him, he's come up with another just crazy, audacious idea, basically that Microsoft's going to help every person in the world become more productive. Whether that's someone like you or I, or perhaps even someone who's in rural Kenya living off-grid and has never used the internet. So the picture up here is actually Satya Nadella in Kenya at the end of July, and so when we launched Windows 10, our latest operating system, Satya had this idea that basically instead of doing the incredibly expensive big show in Times Square like a lot of American companies will do with a new technology product launch, the Microsoft executives would basically go off to different locations around the world, and that's how we would launch the new product, because we wanted to send a message that this is, Microsoft is about this new vision, that we want to basically get everybody connected and able to use our cloud services and become more productive as individuals, and that's the thing we're gonna try to do to change things. So Satya decided to go to Kenya, which was amazing, and I was lucky enough to host him at one of our project locations in rural Kenya. So this is actually a picture of him at a school called Burgerett Secondary School, where we actually have a TV white space installation, where the kids now have internet access, and we were able to go in where there was an existing computer lab that wasn't connected and had Windows 7 on it, on the devices, and we upgraded those devices to Windows 10, and now they're all connected. So that's kind of what motivates us. And so to get a little bit more specific about sort of the issue around access and the problem. So we've heard about sort of explosion of growth and IoT and that set of problems. But then there's this other set of problems of how are we going to get people who don't even have internet connectivity today connected to networks and using it. And if you look around the world today, there are about 3.2 billion people who are online or are online in some way. But what that means is there's 4 billion people in the world today who've never been online, which is amazing if you think about it, right? I mean, we all just assume that everybody's online using data, but the reality is the majority of people in the world actually are not online. So how do we solve that problem? And of course the problem is more acute in emerging markets, particularly in Africa and emerging Asia. Not far from where we are here, there are a lot of countries that have serious connectivity issues. For example, the Philippines, which is just nearby. So we're motivated as a company to help to solve that problem. So from a Microsoft perspective, just looking at this strategically, the thing that we want from connectivity, we want from the way people access networks, is we want it to be ubiquitous. We want to investigate technologies and business models and partnerships that can enable more people in the world to be connected where they are, where they want to be connected, in more places. We want the cost of access to go down over time. We want technology to capture efficiency and drive that cost of access, reduce the cost of delivering a bit of data, and we want that connectivity to be robust. We want when smart people in Redmond or in Microsoft research in Beijing or in Cambridge, England come up with some cool idea, we want and it requires a certain amount of bandwidth to deliver that experience, or a certain latency. We want that connection to be robust enough to enable that kind of delivery. So some of the kind of scenarios we talk about are things like newer scenarios where meetings sounds kind of basic, but the ability to really be immersed in the engagement across thousands of miles in sort of a completely HD setting, and enabling that. Wearables, I mean, we're seeing a lot more around wearables that sort of fits into the IoT world in a sense, and including wearables that are actually not on your wrist but actually implanted, as you said. I actually have a pacemaker, so I empathize with that comment. And then just for the bigger issue of Internet of Things. So TV white spaces. What's how do we get involved in this, and why does this matter? And Sirwaz going to go afterwards is going to get into more of a conversation around sort of why TV white spaces. So I'm not going to get too technical with this in front of this technical audience, otherwise I'll embarrass myself. But I was actually at a conference a couple weeks ago, and it was actually had really not anything to do with dynamic spectrum access to TV white spaces, which actually made it kind of fun. It was different. It was actually a UN General Assembly got together in New York over a couple of weeks, and there was a whole bunch of conferences around that, and we actually were lucky enough to get an award from the US State Department for the best public-private partnership of the year for our project in the Philippines, which involved the Philippine government and some technology companies. And one of the speakers was talking about the sharing economy, sort of this emerging sharing economy, and I was thinking about sort of my own. Not even thinking about this area of spectrum, but just not even dynamic spectrum access, but actually I was thinking of myself in terms of work and working with millennials. And it's one of these situations where you reach a certain age and you start to have generation issues in the work. And I was thinking about millennials, and I was thinking about the sharing economy, and this is a generation that's going to change everything. And this whole notion of the sharing economy is something they can completely understand. We come from, older people like me. I mean, we come from sort of the old sort of, I own it, I have property kind of economy. Leverage as much value out of the thing that I own. But there's this whole emerging area of sharing, right? And you think about companies like Uber and Airbnb and other, these are companies that just have come out of nowhere and have sort of leveraged, inefficiencies in the market and figured out ways to get value out of it. And so I was thinking about that with spectrum. I mean, I think, you think of unlicensed access with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and other kinds of unlicensed technologies. That was sort of a very kind of basic version of the sharing economy. But I think of DSA and TV white spaces as a new kind of sharing economy. And the idea that you can think of Airbnb with the hotel room, right? And the idea that basically people who own homes can open up a bedroom in their house and put it into the sharing economy is revolutionary. And so think about, hotels are kind of like, owners of exclusive use spectrum, and they've got all these rooms, and this has been the way that people have traveled over time. But now there's this whole new model of just basically people grabbing rooms here and there and getting online and doing that. And I think of the spectrum sharing phenomenon as kind of a similar kind of thing. And I think that TV white spaces is a very basic version of that. Wi-Fi was probably even more basic, and we're going to see increasing sophistication in that kind of context over time. So I can envision some crazy millennial who's going to come, who's going to perfect this and come up with this awesome spectrum sharing economy kind of model and become the next billionaire out of Silicon Valley or somewhere. So in terms of TV white spaces specifically, I mean, I think one of the things we love about it is, and I think the thing that kind of differentiates it is using the spectrum that's below 1 gigahertz, and it has great range and throughput, and it enables all kinds of applications. It's also globally harmonized, which is great from a developed technology perspective. What we're already seeing validated in our deployments we're involved in, I'll get a little bit more about this, is that it is low cost already, and it's going to become cheaper over time as companies, some of them in the audience here, develop technology and bring it to market. And it is going to enable all kinds of applications. So while we haven't seen much around IoT with TV white spaces yet, it's coming. It's just a matter of time before the devices become smaller and more capable. So this is just an example of what we're seeing, which is really encouraging to us, and it helps to validate some of the things we've been seeing. And there's a lot of words on the slide, but the bottom line is that, and it gets back to this issue of what does it cost us to deliver a bit, right? And what we're seeing is with TV white spaces is already super cheap technology. So you compare a TV white space base station radio to the LTE base station radio. It's never an apples-to-apples comparison, but basically it's a tenth of the cost. So you can enable all kinds of new business models because of that. So you think of delivering access in rural Kenya, the picture with Sachi Nadella, super low cost, cheap networks, leveraging this frequency and the technology can enable some interesting new business models. And we'll see this, again, we'll see this get better. In terms of that range issue I was talking about, well, there's also in-building penetration is a great opportunity for TV white spaces. Think of the Wi-Fi scenarios that we have today where you have in-building AV distribution and the ability to get through more walls with radio frequency at low cost is really interesting. And then if you think about sort of indoor-out, right? So Wi-Fi is this technology that's been great for indoor and at low power, and it's good for that. But one of the cool things is this idea of indoor-out. So if you look at this visual on the right-hand side behind me, or the left-hand side for you, you have different circles, and so you have kind of like 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz, and then TV white spaces of 600 megahertz, and basically going indoor-out. So think of like in a neighborhood where you can extend the range of coverage so that, back to this idea of sharing economy, people can start sharing their connections with each other. So you already have companies like Fawn who have been quite successful in leveraging models around sharing Wi-Fi access. Now imagine if, all of a sudden 80% the ability to connect 80% of the time to Wi-Fi becomes 90 or 95% of the time because you're leveraging the range of 600 megahertz as a third mode of Wi-Fi. And then you have this possibility of kind of a thinner top-down network on the right-hand side with a base station in a town that has coverage. It might not have as much capacity in it than you might have in an LTE base station, but it's going to have range to complement this bottom-up connectivity. So I can totally see this in a kind of developed world setting where you've got a lot of last-mile infrastructure you can hang Wi-Fi off of. You can share connections bottom-up that way, and then you have this thinner top-down wide area network that provides you with coverage, right? And earlier there was that discussion around capacity coverage kind of scenarios. So this is the thing I spend most of my time on is projects, and we've gone from basically technology trials to in lab on Microsoft campus, bigger trials to pilot projects where we're actually applying the technology to use cases to small-scale commercial deployments, and now we're at this phase where we're looking for big scale. So we're looking for big projects to really deploy the technology, having validated what we've felt all along about the potential. So if you look around the world today in terms of Microsoft and TV white spaces, this isn't everything. This is just what Microsoft's been involved in. We've got something like 16 live projects, and they range from really small projects like just, like in Bhutan, we've got a project that I'm looking at Jeffrey because he's from Microsoft because he was involved in that, where we're connecting up some healthcare clinics using TV white space technology in kind of an extreme rural scenario, small project to urban Singapore, think of like hyper-connected, right, already, but then they want to be even more connected. So they're using TV white spaces and all kinds of cool applications in a pilot project that Jeffrey from Microsoft and others in the room have been involved in. And then emerging markets, Africa, so extreme rural Namibia, basically the northern border with Angola. We've got a big 9,000 square kilometer TV white space network we deployed using adaptance technologies. Hai Tang, the CEO of that company, is here in the audience. So that's extreme rural, off-grid, solar-powered, to extreme urban in Africa, in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where we're doing university campus Wi-Fi networks using TV white spaces as essentially bridge between connections. So we've got a lot of projects. They tend to be small. And in the bottom, I kind of rolled up some numbers in terms of what we're doing. Actually, these numbers, they're probably accurate maybe a few weeks ago. I mean, the numbers are going up all the time as we deploy projects, but 84 K-12 schools we've connected, 40,000 students, 9 university campuses, 143,000 university students. At this point, probably at least a few 100,000 people under coverage of these networks. So we're starting to do some bigger projects, and now we're looking for entire states, entire countries, working with our partners to enable those kind of scenarios. So I'm actually in a business development organization. So my mindset now is all about sort of what's the deal? What's the commercial opportunity here? This is not about just proving anything. I mean, if it doesn't actually derive revenue for ourselves and our partners, forget about it. We'll all go home. So, although some of the projects might sound a bit like corporate social responsibility, we go into all of these with a business person's mindset of what is this going to enable from a revenue perspective. So these are some examples of in emerging markets some of the business models that our projects are enabling, and I think we'll get into. I'll go into a little bit more in a few examples, and we'll talk about it in a second. But if you go sort of from left to right at the top, sort of pay-as-you-go, prepaid access kind of models that predominate in emerging markets. Small and medium size enterprise postpaid bundles. So basically, their buying power is better, and they're more able to pay on a postpaid basis, and they want the full connection. And they're interested in bundling up connectivity with things like cloud services, Office 365, maybe even devices. The idea of community or family accounts. So you're seeing, like in the U.S., the mobile operators sell these accounts where you can define your family however you want, and you can have 10 people on it, and you all get together and you pay a certain amount. So the idea is, like in emerging markets, bring connectivity to like a cyber cafe or a home, and everyone can share that account, and we don't care how many of you are using it. We get you an Office 365 account. If you want to go, if you're an operator of a cyber cafe and you want to go sell access to those accounts on a smaller basis, maybe a daily or hourly or some other form, we don't care. Just go for it. Try it out. Ad-supported models, those are kind of obvious. Power and packets. So one of the challenges in emerging markets, think of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa don't have power at home. So you can't deliver broadband access without also delivering power. So the idea here is, can you bundle up connectivity with power and cloud services all basically together in an offering to consumers or small businesses or whomever. The .com.org is more of like a cross-subsidization model, where on the .org side, maybe you're doing schools, but you're leveraging the infrastructure you deploy at schools to create a network. Maybe you get NGO funding or government subsidy to deploy to schools, and the network is a multi-use network, so you leverage that infrastructure to also go off and deploy services that are revenue generating for you. And then the other one is government as a customer. So I travel around the world, I talk to governments all the time. You ask governments, whether it's in the US or Botswana, Malawi, what do you we've got this interesting technology, it can do X, Y, and Z, what interests you? What are some of the policy challenges you're facing? What do you want to do? The one that I hear all the time is education, right? So everyone wants their kids to be online and be able to access online content. They don't want to be left behind. They don't want their kids to be left behind in the 21st century economy. So selling to government in terms of getting everyone connected, or healthcare is another one that's sort of the second one typically, and then other kinds of government applications and verticals. So those are kind of some of the examples we're involved in today. So let me just get into I'm just going to get into a little bit of detail on a few of these projects just to kind of tweak your imagination a bit. So this is Ghana, a company called Spectralink Wireless, so a Ghanaian internet service provider. We're partnering up with them, a company called 6 Harmonics, which is an Ottawa-based TV white space radio manufacturer. And so the idea there is university campus Wi-Fi, initially is what they're looking at, and then small and medium-sized enterprise. So we're doing basically Wi-Fi networks on university campuses using TV white spaces as sort of point-to-multipoint backhaul to Wi-Fi hotspots. And then they're delivering internet access to small and medium-sized enterprises using TV white spaces as basically the last mile connectivity option. And they were able to get a license from the Ghanaian Communications Authority. So earlier you heard, you've got 4 countries today who have regulations in place. So what we often do, we'll go into countries pre-regulation and get their permission, or get the operator will get their permission to deploy their business, give them enough runway so that they can feel like the investment's going to be protected. And we're off and running, and meanwhile the government can work on regulations. So in the case of the NCA, they're very forward-looking, and they issued a 5-year authorization to this company SpectraLink to go off and deploy a commercial service. And meanwhile, they're actually licensing other folks as well. So it's not just, this isn't just about exclusive access for one company. So that's one example. Another one is the Kenya example I mentioned earlier. So that's a collaboration between the Kenya Ministry of Information and Communications, Microsoft, a company called Mawingu Networks, JTL, which is a fiber optic network operator in Kenya, looking to basically extend that fiber using last mile access solutions. Adapter, I mentioned earlier, is involved in that project. And it's really super low cost access. So basically the average revenue per user per month for Mawingu Networks business model is about $3 a month. So someone can go and buy a week of broadband access for 80 shillings, the equivalent of 80 US cents. And it's a broadband connection. This is not, this isn't dial-up. This is, a good, solid broadband connection, low latency. You can do all the applications you want to use on that network. Plus, you get unlimited device charging. So a lot of these folks don't have electricity again, like I said earlier. So now they can go into the little Mawingu agent, the guy in the Duka, they call him in East Africa, little shop selling bandwidth, and they can charge their BlackBerry or whatever kind of device at the Duka, plug it in, and as much charging as you want. And then they're also looking at the small business play as the dedicated connections to small business for considerably more money. And of course, bandwidth is extremely expensive in places like Africa, so they're willing to pay for it. The next one is actually a healthcare project in Botswana. So this is, again, another big priority of government. And so that one we're partnering with actually the University of Pennsylvania, Botswana. So they have actually a campus in Botswana, and they have specialized medicine available in Gaborone, which is the capital of Botswana. In Botswana, there's only one doctor who specializes in cervical cancer, and she's in Gaborone. So if you've got a problem, if you've got cervical cancer and you need to be treated, or you need a diagnosis, you have to basically go to Gaborone to get that. So women are at serious risk in a place like Botswana of not getting the care they need. So the idea here is basically a telemedicine project where we're connecting up rural healthcare clinics so that the clinicians can connect up with the specialists in Gaborone, or potentially even in Philadelphia in the US, where there are other specialists, to provide remote diagnosis. There's a health records management system that's being put in place. And so beginning cervical cancer, tuberculosis, dermatology, and HIV/AIDS are the specialties we're going to focus on that project. So that one's now up and running. And we're, in terms of the network operator, we're partnering with a company called Global Broadband Solutions, which is a Botswanan ISP. So US, why aren't you in the US, Microsoft? Don't you care about, you're an American company. So yes, we've done a lot in emerging markets. That's an obvious place to do these kinds of projects. There's a huge need there, but there's also a big need in the US. And people are often amazed, I'm amazed, and a little bit embarrassed by the fact that there are 30 million American children who don't have internet access at home. It's about 20 million households, and often that tracks poverty. So you have a lot of kids who are living in homes that are economically challenged, and they don't have internet access at home. So there's this notion of the homework gap, which has become a big issue for policymakers in the US, and it's a big issue for us as well, because again, we want to sell Office 365. Actually, we give it away. Office 365 for education. We want kids in schools to have access to technology, and it's kind of useless if we get every kid an Office 365 seat and they can't use it when they go home and do their homework, right? And it creates an achievement gap that's also a bit shameful. So having spent all this time doing schools projects around the world, I want to do some stuff in the US. So we're going to get our first project going in the US soon. It was just green-lighted in the last few weeks. We just had our first project planning meetings. So this is in Southern Virginia, down near the North Carolina border. It's actually, the county is called Charlotte County, and there's another one called Halifax County. Partnering with a company that has basically a fiber network that goes across Southern Virginia. They've got about 159 schools in Southern Virginia where they've got fiber connectivity to the school already, right? So this fiber going to the school but half the kids don't have internet access at home in these areas, from what we've been told by the superintendents of those school districts. So what we're going to do is put little TV whitespace base station radios on top of the schools. No, this isn't like big tower stuff. This is small little kind of mass. I mean, anyone who's worked with TV whitespace technology knows this is possible. And we're going to extend that coverage from the schools to the kids' homes. So just by virtue, in these two counties, by virtue of just putting small TV whitespace stations on top of all the schools, we can have complete coverage in the two counties. So 16 schools, 16 3-sector base stations, bang, you've got complete coverage. So now the kids can basically, the idea is we'll have an AP, an access point that's kind of a two-headed device. TV whitespace is back to the schools, Wi-Fi on the side of the devices they use. We tell the kid, hey, you know what? Here's your device. Go home. You know what direction the school is, right? Well, put it in the window. Plug it in, put it in the window in the direction of the school, and you'll have connectivity. We'll get them onto an education network. It's not going to be. This isn't about like a completely wide open form of access. We want them to be able to do their homework, and so it'll become more of a curated form of connectivity. So we're going to start in phase one of this with 2 counties. 3,500 kids out of 7,000 total, we think, are going to be in need of this access. If more want it, we'll provide it. And then phase 2 of it is basically to go across the coverage, the network coverage of our partner Mid-Atlantic broadband communities. So it's 159 schools there, so it's something like 70,000 kids. We go from 7,000 to 70,000. And without doing any PR, no real outreach, the state government already knows about it in Virginia. They've already called our education guy in, the government affairs person in, and they're already talking about, well, if you're doing it in Southern Virginia, we've got another 200,000 kids that need help as well. So let's talk about that as well. And so, I mean, my expectation is this is something that's going to get a lot of attention, and we're going to start to do this in a lot of other places around the country in the U.S. So I'm really excited to be involved in that project. So stay tuned on that one. We'll get the first families on network hopefully by the end of the first quarter next year, and then by the time all the kids show up for school next year, they'll all be ready to be connected. So regulation's a big deal. Like Tony, I used to work at the FCC in the U.S. I worked on universal access issues for them. Also, I spent a lot of time working for mobile operators in the U.S., working on spectrum issues. I'm very familiar with all of those fights. So on TV white spaces, the U.S. has been a leader on spectrum sharing, as you saw in some of the presentations earlier. So U.S., Canada, UK, Singapore have all basically, they've adopted the regulations. They're in some phase of deployment. The U.S. is already like on version 4 of their TV white space regulations. They just made some additional changes. One of which really helps the Virginia scenario, where they're basically allowing power to go from 4 watts EIRP to 10 watts EIRP on the base station, which makes a difference between, like having 60% coverage to 100% coverage in those areas, which is fantastic, and we really appreciate that. There are a bunch of other countries that are looking at this. I mean, places as obscure as it might seem from here, places like Malawi, a less developed African country. There's a few people there who are real pioneers, leaders in the space, and because of that, they're close to being done on TV white space regulations. Ghana is another one looking at this, the Philippines. And then all of these examples at the bottom where we've got projects going, we or others have projects going where we've seen trials happen. So there's a lot of interest. Taiwan is on the list at the bottom. I'd love for them to be the list at the top. You have an opportunity, you have companies, you have know-how in Taiwan. Not only for Taiwanese, but an opportunity to export technology and know-how around the world. One of the things I love about these projects, and one of the things that, sort of reflecting back on my time in Washington, D.C., where I lived for a bunch of years before joining Microsoft, and now I'm back in D.C., is this, like when you're in academia or you're in policy, doing policy or regulation, you're so detached from the impact of the work you do, right? And you're working on, you're in the minutiae around, a piece of regulation, or you're working on some research, and you don't really think about it. I mean, in an abstract way, you think about the impact that you can have, but you don't really get up and close and personal with it. And one of the awesome things about these kinds of projects is you really can get up and close and personal and see the impact. Think about the impact of what connectivity means to a kid in rural Namibia. And what kind of impact it has. How life altering that can be for him or her. We did a cool demo when I was in Kenya with Satya Nadella, where we were in a school in rural Kenya on a solar-powered TV whitespace network, and we basically did a Skype video chat from that school on a TV whitespace network to another school on a TV whitespace network in rural India, and we got the kids talking to each other. It was just fantastic. It was one of these golden moments. And Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, is on there talking to the kids in India, and they're talking back, and the kids are asking each other questions. It was one of these games where it's like, figure out where I am in the world. So it wasn't too hard for the African kids to figure out they were talking to kids in India, but they didn't know exactly where in India, or the South Asian continent they were. And likewise, the Indian kids were like, oh, okay, you're probably in Africa somewhere. Okay, well, let's see if we can narrow that down. And it was amazing how quickly the kids figured it out, actually. ITU, we talked about that a bit earlier. There's nothing, right now there's a lot of studies happening in ITU, and there will continue to be, but there's really nothing in ITU regulations that really should prevent anyone from, any country from going ahead to TV whitespace access, as an example. And this is actually a quote from the head of the Radio Communications Bureau at the ITU. So basically his point was, look, TV, cognitive radio systems, dynamic spectrum access, TV white spaces, these opportunities are essentially in the hands of regulators today. They can go for it. They can go forward and do this kind of stuff. We're not talking about doing global reallocations of spectrum like the ITU often gets involved in. So it's perfectly okay to do it under current regulations, but there certainly will be studies around how it gets done, and technical studies and regulatory studies and socioeconomic studies that we've been involved in, for example, ITUD. So this is a group that Microsoft is involved in called the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, and you might actually notice on here there's a couple icons here that are close to home here. So a couple very important academic and research institutions in Taiwan are members of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, which is a huge value to us. So III and NTU are members of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, and we definitely value their membership. I helped found the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance along with some other companies. I'm the chairman of the board, and the goal here is really about sort of bridging that divide between very complicated, abstract technology discussions and a conversation with regulators and policymakers around how do we take the abstract and make it real from a policy-making perspective. So it's not about pushing a standard or doing projects. Companies can go out and do that themselves. It's much more focused on the policy space. So this is a bit more about the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance's focuses. So it's universal access is certainly one piece of it, enabling the Internet of Things, dealing with this whole issue of spectrum scarcity and turning scarcity into abundance in the sharing economy we're going to create around spectrum. All of us in this room will do that. Here's some of the goals, as I mentioned. So just to sort of step back, some lessons learned for me, and I think for all of us so far in terms of enabling dynamic spectrum access, first in TV white spaces and then eventually in other bands. We validated what we have suspected about the opportunity here. So there's no question in our mind it works. Bad things don't happen. Broadcasters don't get interfered with. It's a great building block technology with other technologies. So this isn't like an either-or kind of issue here. This is an and. So this isn't tyranny of the or. This is and. This is the, you use building blocks. You take your toolkit out and you say, okay, I want to use 5 gigahertz for this and TV white space for that, and a bit of LTE and a bit of 2G and some fiber and fixed microwave and build a network. The pricing of CPE remains a serious problem because we're at small scale today, but that's going to change because we're going to start to do some big projects and help to drive down that cost. For us, finding motivated partners is critical. We don't do this on our own. We're not going to become a last mile provider of broadband access. We always partner with internet access providers to make it happen. Access to financing is an issue, especially in emerging markets where cost of capital is pretty high. So we've been able to do some matchmaking between some of these companies and donor agencies like USAID and others, and leverage universal service funding in some places. Like in Jamaica, we have a project where the Universal Service Fund is funding a deployment. That's also something that could potentially happen in the US, we'll see. And development banks are also key. Things like the Asian Development Bank and World Bank and others. The end of the day, for me, regulation is the key to unlocking this. I mean, all the building blocks are in place. We just need more countries to open up their markets through regulation, and Taiwan is really no different. And I think that having gone through a trial and looked at this, and with companies in the country who are at the forefront of this technology and have a huge opportunity to export their know-how around the world, companies like MediaTek and others, it's really, in our view, time for NCC to move forward and put the regulations in place. Singapore's already done it. I mean, come on, if Singapore can do it, why not Taiwan? I was riding down the elevator this morning, and there was a guy in front of me who walked in with this book, and on the back cover, there was, in decently sized print, so I could see it. There was kind of a statement around leadership, and I'm paraphrasing because I couldn't memorize it, but basically the point of the saying was managers tell you what's not possible, leaders tell you what's possible. And I was like, man, I love that quote. That's cool, So NCC needs to be a leader. You guys are already leaders because you're already doing the forward research on this. NCC needs to be a leader. Don't tell us what's not possible. Tell us what's possible from a regulatory perspective. Be a leader. There's a pack of regulators who have taken the risk, and they're moving forward with regulation. I mean, if MACRA, the regulator in Malawi, one of the least developed countries in the world, can put TV whitespace regulations in place, surely NCC and Taiwan can do the same thing and take a leadership role. So if you want to learn more about what we're doing, here's a bunch of websites you can visit. If you ever want to talk to me, there's my email address. Even if you don't remember that, if you just typed in spectrumpolicy@microsoft.com, that would magically arrive in my inbox. So thanks for your time. This has been fun. I guess I'm on a panel this afternoon, so you can ask more questions. I'm betting we're way over time, so don't have time for questions right now, but I'm happy to answer them one-on-one. And I guess I'm staying between you and lunch, so I'll shut up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.